Welcome to another edition of Very Vogue with me, Val Kleinhans. Super excited to have Natalie Bencivenga in the building. Natalie is an award-winning socially conscious journalist and media personality from my hometown, Pittsburgh. I've been following her for some time, and I'm thrilled to have her here today. Natalie, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. And you got my last name right on the first try. That was pretty amazing in and of itself.
Really? How often does it happen where they don't?
Ooh, I've
Too
had some,
often.
I've had some interesting stories. One guy actually said, Natalie, the.
But
That was literally what he did. I went, huh, okay.
that was his John Travolta Adele Nazim moment.
Exactly. That was his Adele moment. So that was
Woo!
amazing. So all the snaps for you.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you. What made me gravitate toward you was realizing that you and I have a lot in common. I
Okay.
board opted at KDKA radio like 11 years ago, and I sort of got familiar with Pittsburgh's media scene from then on. I got my broadcast degree at Point Park, and I was doing a little research, and I wondered if maybe you had done anything similar. So I read and learned you actually have a bachelor's degrees in biology, philosophy, and you were even accepted into medical school, but you chose to follow your creative heart and dive into media instead. So why media above all those other things?
No, that's a good question. And we all question our life choices from time to time. But
Same.
when I got accepted into medical school, I'd always been sort of the classic overachiever, oldest daughter syndrome, sort of, so to speak.
Ah,
So for me, it was like, well, medicine, both my parents, my dad was a chiropractor, my mother was a nurse. I was always really good at math and science, and I loved helping people. It just made sense. But then when I actually started doing my undergrad at Pitt and working in hospital settings and doing research in the labs and actually being in the spaces, I was really disillusioned with the lack of real care that doctors were able to give their patients because
mm,
the way the system was structured. And I was already feeling frustrated. And I thought, oh my, if I'm already feeling frustrated just as a low level um, you know, student, as an undergrad, working in these spaces, volunteering, doing research, all these things, how is this going to progress? I feel like I'm going to get more and more depressed and stressed. So I told myself I would just defer my seat for a year after much soul searching. And if
okay.
nothing happened from the creative end, I was always a writer. I loved to, I loved doing things in front of the camera, behind the camera, writing, performing, all that stuff. I said, you know what, I'll give myself a year, and if nothing transpires, med school's not going anywhere. So that's what I did. And then the rest is kind of history. I've never really looked back.
It's just one foot in front of the other, and we kept
Yeah,
it moving.
I mean, that's all you can do too, and
Yeah.
I've taken a lot of different side roads and detours in my career too. So I don't feel like success is in any way linear.
Right. I kind of did the flip version of that in a weird,
Mhm.
weird way. It's like I started in media and then I
Yeah.
was like, it's actually kind of hard to keep a job if you're, well, I wanted to stay in Pittsburgh. I'll just be real. But
Yeah.
I was told by numerous program directors, as much as they loved me and my energy and my voice, I just didn't have the experience. So I went
Yeah.
to other parts of the country, Illinois, Minnesota, and tried to
Mm.
get that experience on the air. I'm speaking specifically about being
Sure.
on the air because there's a difference. For those who don't know, that is like
Oh,
they look at that as a whole other animal. Like production is one thing, but actually hosting is completely different.
totally.
So yeah, so to get those hosting chops, they wanted me to just get some more experience and get out there. And I was like, okay, I'll do it. So I was doing it in Illinois, done it in Minnesota. And then I was like, man, this is just a tough industry. It's
Yeah.
very cutthroat. It's it's a lot of
Yeah.
fun, but it's super cutthroat and it's very subjective.
Hmm.
And for my own mental health, I decided that I just wanted, something a little bit more cut and dry, not as subjective. And I could sort of leave my job with me when I'm done at 5 o'clock, that
Yeah.
sort of thing. So, how, being, in media, knowing what it is, how do you protect your mental health while you go through it?
Yeah. I know it's a great question. And you have to have a really thick skin. I mean, especially as a woman in the industry, I've dealt with a lot of sexism. I've dealt with a lot of ageism
Hmm.
too. I was, one of the younger people in the newsroom in different spaces that I worked
Oh,
in. And,
yeah.
there was a lot of pushback. And to your point, not having quote unquote experience, but also knowing the way the world is and media changing so quickly. it's important to listen to young voices in those spaces, because a lot of times they're on the cutting edge of certain technology trends that people that are older in a newsroom aren't really thinking about. I mean, we now see what a mistake it was for so many newsrooms to not jump on board with digital content and digital platforms
Right.
earlier, and how so many of them are playing catch up, and how TikTok and Instagram have really changed the game, and YouTube really have changed the game in terms of how we digest and process media. So, yeah, you have to have a really thick skin, but I have a lot of hobbies. I'm not, I love my work, but my work is not who I am. And
Mm,
so I really tried to make that differentiation. Even when I write something, once I put it out into the world, it's no longer belongs to me. That's what I always say to myself. This is no longer mine. I let it, I be free. Like, whether
yeah.
people love it or hate it or whatever, it doesn't belong to me anymore. So that's kind of, you have to release the ego along with that. So I love yoga. I love to work out. I love spending time with my family, and I love to cook. I'm a vegan. I've been vegan for over a decade now, and before anybody thought it was cool. And so I love experimenting in the kitchen
Yeah.
in that way. I love to read. I just, you have to find other things that bring you joy. And work should not be the be all end all of our lives. So trying to compartmentalize those things in certain ways can be helpful for your mental health too.
Yeah.
And shutting off the phone at night, which is a struggle and a challenge, but I've gotten better with it. After like 7 o'clock, I really do kind of tuck it away, so I'm not doom scrolling all night, because it's easy
Yeah.
to do.
So easy to do. When you do get, hate comments or come across just
Mhm.
some nasty stuff online, because it happens. It happens to all of us.
Yes, it
Do you
does.
do you even respond at all, or do you just say, okay, this is what it is and I'm going to let it go," like you were just talking about?
Yeah, Val, it really depends on what kind of mood I am in, because sometimes I'll troll the trolls. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
if I'm in the mood and there's somebody that's in my DMs and he's just, and it's mostly men, let's be real. It's mostly 99% of
Always.
with me, at least it's men. And you know, sometimes I will go back and forth just for my own entertainment, but of course I try to limit that, because that also can cause your heart rate to go up.
Hmm.
But generally speaking, honestly, there are people in my life who are my mentors, my colleagues, my trusted friends. I will take constructive criticism any day of the week. I want to grow and I want to be better. But if someone's just making fun of, my face or my voice or something like that, it's like, well, there's nothing to gain or to learn from that experience. So that's muted. But I don't,
Mm,
I really try not to internalize it. Because it's not of me, it's a projection. Like, they're projecting whatever it is onto me, and what they're seeing, that Instagram clip, that's not who I am. That's a part of my professional persona. That's not
hmm.
me. So I think finding ways to protect your space is really important. But I'm also on a micro level, if I was someone like Selena Gomez, who, she talks about how she's literally had to take herself off social media because
Right.
it just piles on. I think that's the healthiest thing to do. Whatever you have to do to protect yourself, because this is not worth it. None of this is worth your sanity, for sure. And
No,
you
and that's
don't
so
keep you
interesting.
anything.
Right. That's so interesting coming from you, because when I watch what you do online, I'm like, this woman is dedicated. She has the balls to cover things that I
Thank
think
you.
are important. And most of us really should be talking about more. I mean, you've covered Pittsburgh's homeless situation, the fact that our leaders use fear to divide us and create
Mhm,
this crazy political climate we're living in right now.
mhm,
Guns, which is always a touchy thing.
mhm,
You've realized, oh, whether or not to have open relationships. That was another thing I saw.
mhm, mhm.
Can you talk to me about the moment where you realized that covering things is so important, and maybe even more important than those loud, hateful voices that pop up from the time? When did you realize that this is more important and this is what I want to be doing?
Yeah, it really started. I would say it started well before I wanted to be in media. I would look at my grandmothers. They are both incredibly strong women, and I think the way that they lived their lives so authentically and so boldly and so intersectionally, and they were both feminists. And
Mm,
my mother is such a feminist. I think growing up with all of these incredibly strong female archetypes in my life, I've always pulled from that ancestral strength whenever I've been afraid to speak, because I think when my grandmothers grew up, how incredibly different the world was. And these
Right.
were strong Italian women, but they were living in times where Italians were like dirt, and they were treated that way. And so they stood up and they found their voice. And so when I think this, whenever I'm afraid to speak, I think to myself, what would my grandmothers say about this? They'd be angry because they know this isn't right. And so the conviction isn't about me, it's about what's bigger than me, and understanding that there really is a right side to history here. And
Hmm.
it's always the side that leads with empathy, compassion, and intersectional justice. And so I speak because I have to. It's just in me. I can't be silent because I see injustice and it makes me so worked up. It's worse for me to stay silent. That would actually be harder on my self sense of mental health.
Yeah.
So when I started doing this work, I didn't start in this space, right? I worked in different spaces. And I still write in a lot of different spaces. But that courage also comes from when people DM me and they say thank you for speaking on this, or this is encouraging me now to go and vote, or I wasn't registered to vote and now I am. Those little victories that I hear from time to time, they're like those little ripples in the pond, that you realize
Mm.
are making a bigger, way bigger than you. And so that's the inspiration for me, is knowing that journalism is a form of social work, and I have my master's in social work,
Yes.
and I take that very seriously. And this work is um, is not just about lip service for me. It's solutions driven, and it's about, okay, we're talking about it so we can act on it, so we can all have a chance to thrive. So that's sort of the trajectory. So it was a gradual realization, but it started when I was a very young person, watching the women in my lives stand up in their daily lives, in their kitchens, in their living rooms, in their gardens, in their local spaces, for things bigger
Hmm.
than themselves.
And they had the best tomatoes. Don't talk to anybody about
Oh
their
my
tomatoes.
God.
The best tomatoes. Don't
Oh my
challenge the
God.
tomatoes. Listen, I'm
All
I'm a
day.
paisan too. I'm a paisan
I
too.
was feeling that.
I know. I was the vibes were there. But
The
it's
vibes are there.
they were there.
I'm
And well,
not going to
it's
comment on either sauce, which had the better sauce. We're not playing that game.
no, because you will cause war. You will you will cause war and you will get phone calls later. And what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Don't sell me out like that. Like but watching these women in your life, I mean, yes, I'm Italian American too. So on the flip side of that, I actually kind of saw somewhat of the opposite. I'm so glad that, you saw women who were able to speak and chose to speak regardless of what was
Yeah.
going on in the world. I kind of saw the opposite growing up, even though they were strong Italian women too. I mean, they were strong in the sense that they put providing for their family first, and
Yeah.
that somehow that internalized in, let me not make a lot of noise because
Right.
people don't like Italians right now.
Yeah.
People think that they are subhuman. I mean, when you think about it, this is only 60, 70 years ago.
Oh, my grandmother, she was in Iowa. That was where they ended up settling, her and my grandfather. And
Oh,
they burned the KKK came to her front yard and burned a cross in her yard. So I mean,
right.
they really understood and experienced, some real hate. And my grandmother just truly believed that we were all here to be, to help one another and to be with each other. And she never let any of that stop her from taking care of all the people around her, no matter who they were, what walk of life they came from. And that was important for me to see as a child.
That's crazy. So KKK because they're Catholic? I'm
Because they were Italian. And
because okay.
yeah, because at the time it was a large, I believe, German settlement that was in this part of
Yeah.
Iowa. So being Italian, their neighbors were Black. My grandmother's neighbors were Black. They lived in the very poorest part of this town, and the
Mm,
KKK did not want my family there, and were very
wow.
threatening to them. Yeah,
That's crazy. Well, see, and things like
and
that is
not that
probably
that's
why.
two generations of women. That's not long ago.
No, that's 60, 70 years ago, like we were
Mhm.
just talking about. Like, and that's why I think my grandmother was like, let me just keep to myself and not say anything. And then
Sure.
I would watch her be mistreated while she was working at Kaufman's
Oh
or
yeah.
something like that. And just because she was in, a nice department store, but people would treat her like dirt, she didn't say nothing. And I was like, man, hearing those stories and
Yes.
listening to the misogyny that my mom dealt with being CAD
Oh,
for
yeah.
anybody listening, CAD operator. She actually worked for Brickmont, who was I think part of, or I don't know if that was a company, but she was somehow involved with like the deck in the PBG building. She was a CAD operator for them. So hardcore into
Wow.
steel. So she dealt with like just horrible treatment from men in
Mhm.
that field just because it is male dominated. And I'm
Yeah.
watching these women like stay silent and like keep to themselves. And I'm like, I can't do this.
Yeah.
I gotta talk about this because I will not want my daughter to go through that or
Yeah.
any other woman
And I
for
mean,
that matter.
their form of resistance was handling that so then you could be in a place where
Yeah.
you could have that opportunity to speak. And I think each generation of women has had to deal with the macro and the microaggressions in whatever ways that they can. And so it's just about dismantling these systems of oppression that keep us all, you know, in chains. And we're all experiencing it differently, but there are plenty of things out there that we should be standing in solidarity with, and that's why I speak to these issues when I'm doing my work, because we all pretty much want the same things, right? And if we stand
Hmm.
together, all these different groups of people, and stand together and say this is what we demand because this is what we deserve as human beings, we'll have a much better chance of getting it than when we start dividing and parceling ourselves apart.
Yeah. And when we're in a day where we're bombarded with just so much information daily, constantly,
Yeah.
how do we get people to care?
Right. And I grapple with this a lot, and I'd come up with this tagline that I started using for my work a few years ago: inspire, educate, and activate. And I think what we do, or what I've tried to do with my work and the people that I aspire to be like and what they do with their work, is you've got to grab people and inspire them. It's one thing to make them afraid, right? There's a lot of fear mongering that goes on in media, and we see it all day long.
Hmm.
But when you can inspire someone to feel like now they see what the issue is, you've given them a little bit of an education around the issue, just whatever it is, and now you're saying, look, don't be paralyzed by this. There's things that you can do right in your own backyard. That's a huge light bulb moment for a lot of people. So it's not about trying to get these big sweeping changes to happen overnight. It's getting people to recognize how much power they already have and the
Mm.
changes that they can make already right in front of them. And then once you take one little step, it's much easier to take another and another and another. And that to me is how you create the groundswell, the true grassroots around things that will lead to large structural changes. So that's
Yeah.
where the work kind of goes for me.
One step at a time.
Yeah, that's all you can do.
Yeah. So what keeps you motivated?
I think what keeps me motivated is seeing what's going on right now, in particular with the United States and what's going on in the world. But
Mhm.
the dismantling of women's rights, the transphobic policies being laid out, the racist policies being laid out, all of these things um, frighten me and make me realize that if not now, when? If we're not going to solve
Mm.
these problems now, what are we waiting for? How bad do we want it to get? Our kids have to do active shooter drills in their first grade classrooms. To me, it's
Yeah.
like we're at the end of the road here. Climate change is quickly uh, eroding the way that we're going to be living in the near future. So the time is now. So I feel more of this sense of urgency around the work, where I want to be a teeny tiny little part of this greater cause for progressive change in our communities. And the things that we're fighting for are things that were kind of should have been solved 50 to 100 years ago, and some of them were getting to that point, and we've taken great strides back. A lot of times.
Roe versus Wade. Roe versus Wade. Like,
Yes, yes. I mean, even looking at something like, yes, of course, Roe v. Wade, and looking at something like even what's going on with these child labor laws. I mean,
yeah.
why would we want to encourage the next generation of kids to work at 13, 14 years old? Or 12 or 11. That seems immoral. Every generation should be building towards a better next generation. I think of when I started working at the Post-Gazette several years ago, and my grandmother saw my name in the in the column. And she said, if
Mhm.
your grandfather was here, he wouldn't believe to see his family name. Like, she was so proud, that
Yeah.
in 2 generations, upon getting here, her granddaughter was a journalist in this
Yes.
very well-known publication in this region. So I remind myself that change can happen quickly, but we have to be the catalyst. We can't expect other people to do it, and we all can play a little role in that collective change that benefits all of us.
Right. And to soak up the little moments of celebration, like seeing your name in that byline. And
Yeah.
I mean, I've asked that question myself because I didn't get to know my grandmother. I mean, she did come from Italy to this country. She's the one. So I'm only like third generation, I think it is.
Yeah.
And I have always, with all this craziness going on, I have always wanted to ask her, and I didn't get a chance to because she's not with us. But I've always
Mhm.
wanted to ask, is this the same America that she wanted to come to? Like,
Yeah.
is this it? Like, really? Is this
Well,
so
and you know what, Val? That's what's so funny, because when we talk about immigration, right? Our grandmothers and our great grandmothers and so many other peoples, they just came here. It was just there was no process, right? You
Mhm,
just showed up and you came, and that was it. And we welcomed the immigrant
mhm.
in these waves of people. Not saying it was easy once they were here, but this idea that there's been this process all along, there wasn't. You showed up. And so the fact now that we're so against policy wise having people come into this country is so antithetical to what this nation was supposed to be and was for so long. And it just shows you the level of fear mongering and the level of white supremacy that we're still very much experiencing every single day here in the United States, because um, we shouldn't it shouldn't be this hard to become a part of this nation. And we need people. That's the other thing. We're an aging population. We need people to work here, to be here, to live here, to add to the economy, to have families here. And it's completely asinine and short-sighted that we are taking huge steps back. So no, this is not. I don't believe if your grandmother was here, she would see what they're doing with immigration in particular and be like, what the hell is this
I
going on here?
I
Yeah.
just yeah, I wish she were here to ask that question. I
Mhm.
but then she was always somebody that was very motivated by dressing really well too. Like
Yes,
dressing really well made her
that's
feel
right.
good always. And at least
Yes.
that's what I'm told. You're dressed very well right now, so I had to ask because this is called Very Vogue too. When it
Yeah.
comes to fashion and style, let's have a little bit of fun with some fashion and style. What are you wearing when you feel like most put together and most confident?
Oh, I love a classic cocktail dress. It's funny because my style is all over the map, because I love sometimes, you know, uh, a really great structured jacket that's sort of an 80s vibe or a 90s vibe. But then I love dressing like 1950s, 60s glamour plus. And then sometimes
Mhm.
I want to be like super androgynous 90s grunge
Yeah.
girl. So I just love fashion. And my grandmother as well, she and both of them loved clothes, but my mother's mother in particular loved to sew. And since they had no money,
Mm.
my grandmother made pretty much all of her own clothing, and she would walk by, the big department store window, and that her and my mom would go and get a similar fabric, and my grandmother would just make it. And so she was very into tailored, well-fitting suits, beautiful seams. And so I just love beautiful clothing, and I'm a sucker for glamour for sure. I just love it all. I really do. But I like a theme. Like today I was kind of
Yes.
feeling sort of like Southwestern, a little boho with the vibe. So I like theme dressing, and era dressing for sure. How about
Totally. And
you?
a blazer. I don't know what it is, but
You
anytime
just
I've
love
just
the
got
blazer. Hmm.
your basic black blazer, black trousers, I
Yes.
just feel like I can be in a conference room and
Yes.
I know I'm supposed to be here and I can conduct this meeting or I can be part of this meeting. Like
Yes.
there's
Power
just something about
dressing.
it. Yeah, there's just something
I
about
like
that.
it.
And then there's
Hmm.
some days where I feel like, all right, maybe I want to be a little bit more feminine too and go for like a pencil skirt and like
Yes.
animal print top or something like that. And then if I'm doing something that can allow for a little bit more of a casual vibe, it's usually grunge,
Yes.
metal, rock and roll,
Yep.
little bit more of an edge for that, but all of it is part of who we are. And I love dressing in a way that makes us feel like we're representing who we are too.
I
And
love it.
going forward with, the most authenticity possible. That's so important. Um,
Mhm.
what is next for you? What can we look forward to coming from you soon?
Yeah, so I'm working on a bunch of different projects right now. So I have two companies. I have a a sorry, my brain froze there for a second. I have two companies, and one of them is a media consulting company that I co-own with my business partner, Sarah Bachnick, X Squared Media. So we do a bunch of digital media consulting and brand building for companies and individuals all over the country. So that's been really great working on that. And then, of course, the work that I love more than anything, my media work. I have a company called Benci Productions, which is where I house all of my current production and projects. I just wrapped In Other News, which was a 10-episode run with Tony Norman here in the city. It's a podcast that we aired for Next Pittsburgh. And I just had a meeting with City Paper today, the Pittsburgh City Paper, and hopefully going to be doing some digital media product with them, a new web show series perhaps, which could be very exciting. And yeah, I have a few other things on the horizon in terms of projects, but I'm doing a lot of writing. I just finished a article series for Table Magazine on food justice, which has been really great. I'm doing some
Yeah.
segments for Talk Pittsburgh with Heather Abraham, Get Inspired with Natalie B, and just talking about ways in which we can get activated in our communities. And of course, my Instagram show, Facts Over Fear. So I'm building, as we go along, and we'll see what happens next. But there's a lot of exciting things on the horizon. And I just love
Yeah.
creating products and projects. I love producing and I love hosting. So it's been a lot of fun.
Can I be you when I grow up? Like, honestly. Honestly, I'm like, Jesus, she's doing like you're doing it. I love it. I can't wait for it all. Thank you so much for spending some time with me and chatting with us.
Thanks so much for spending time with me and talking about our grandmas. That was the best.
Yeah, it was. I was like, oh, get a little up in here, but
Me too.
but no, it's important to have these conversations, and I do very much appreciate your time.
Thank you.